These are smart, dedicated, loyal Americans. Your audience needs to understand that. The problem is not, there's not those people that are in there. They never get a voice. They are locked away and in there. The problem is the politics of power and wealth that is running this country.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate it. I have a special treat for you here. We have W.H. Wisecarver on the line. He's the author of The Resurrection Saga. Book 2 in the series, An American Journey, was released in 2014, and Book 3, An American Path Forward, is due later this year. He's a former Marine and Top Gun graduate. He also worked in the private sector before going back to the public sector on special assignments and in senior executive positions at the Pentagon and NASA. Boy, Mr. Wisecarver, those are some buzzwords among us libertarians and those who are awakened these days. The Pentagon and NASA. That must have been a head trip for you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Sean, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
It's a real pleasure to have you on. So, given that you worked at the Pentagon and NASA, you are certainly familiar with many of the interworkings of what many, I think, these days are calling the deep state. We can get into that if you'd like. But let me quote this. You guys sent me an excerpt from the new book. I want to read this for folks. It goes like this. The integrity of the individual remains the key to success. The integrity to utilize their intellect with a clear understanding of the facts, to fuse them into a responsible solution, is the only way humans can evolve, whether institutionally or individually. Without the collation and synthesis of the data, it's just incoherent trivia. Without individual integrity, facts can be easily manipulated to keep the unknowing unaware and incapable of making necessary changes. Mr. Wisecarver, as it pertains to that passage from your new book, do you recall the memo that was released? It was a Clinton campaign memo released back in October of 2016 thanks to WikiLeaks, in which the Clinton campaign email outlined an effort to produce an unaware and compliant citizenry. That sounds a lot like what you wrote in your new book. These people, the deep state, the politicians, they want an unaware and compliant citizenry, don't they?
Well, they certainly do, and that is one of the messages that I've continually tried to push throughout the books, which are based on historical fiction and for my time, because there was a little time between the SES positions within the Pentagon and NASA and in the private sector, where I was also on the Hill, where I was National Security Advisor for the Republican Leadership Office. And I was there in 1992. I moved over to become counsel for the Senate Armed Services Committee. And I was there when the Clinton people came in and, we saw everything that they did. And really that was the start of the problem. That exact quote that you have talked about from Book 3 there is really the same thing that what so many people, we used to call it the shadow government, and then it was called deep politics, and now they're calling it the deep state. But it's the same thing. And that is one of the major things, because the first thing you have to do is you have to have an unaware, in a democracy or a Republican form of government, you have to have an unaware constituent to be able to do bad things that you don't want people to be noticing. And we have been witnessing that over the last 25 years. So yes, it's nothing new, but by the same token, with the advent of the media that we have now, you've got a problem. You've got a problem where we're actually dumbing down, and people are, with this political correctness and this groupthink idea, which is why I stress it's the individual's issue, that we're basically dumbing down even faster. And, this whole idea with fake news, and, you can go right down the list about fake news. But yes, this is exactly what is happening. This is one of the primary missions that I really wanted to get across in the books myself, and really bring out some of those things to people.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to this memo because the Clinton campaign email was released as part of the WikiLeaks data dump. And it does talk about the unaware and compliant citizenry. So who said it and why? Evidently, the email was sent to Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman John Podesta by former Clinton administration official Bill Ivey on March 13, 2016. And Ivey wondered how Clinton can combat Trump's larger-than-life appeal, worrying that simply defaulting to policy won't work. And he said, and I quote, "As I've mentioned, we've all been quite content to demean government, drop civics, and in general conspire to produce an unaware and compliant citizenry," end quote. Conspire, an interesting choice of words, don't you think? Since the mainstream media consistently tells us there is no such thing as conspiracies, and those of us that point our finger at wide open conspiracies, as proven really by many of these WikiLeaks emails, they tell us we're tinfoil hat-wearing nuts. There is no conspiracy in government. But you and I both know that there is, and these forces behind the scenes collude against the very public they're supposed to represent. So my question for you is this: how are we to evolve? I know you're saying that what needs to happen is humanity needs to evolve, is sort of the message that you've shared in your books here. How do we evolve when the entire system has been built to create an uninformed, compliant, dumbed-down citizenry?
The beauty of where we are right now, because we are still on the crust of this wave, is that we can evolve it, because that memo is a perfect example. I mean, where did we hear that before? We heard that a couple of years ago when President Obama's healthcare, the guy was saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna get past this thing through," and before anybody even knows what the heck it is. We heard it from Speaker Pelosi when she put the healthcare reform back on the table, 2,400 pages, and said to the Congress, "You've got 18 hours to vote on it." So we've been seeing this, but here's the issue. It's our choice. We still have a choice right now. We still can do this, change this, and change the direction that our country is moving on if we wake up each as an individual and critically think about the things. The issue of course, that's what they wanted. This is exactly why for 500 years, the Vatican would not allow the Bible to be translated into native languages of Europe, because they didn't want anybody, it had to be in Latin or Greek, because they didn't want anybody to be able to read it, because they wanted to interpret it. And so nothing that we haven't seen before, which is why I continually try to bring back the historical parallels within the book, of like, oh, we've seen all this before. And so how are we going to evolve? Well, we're going to evolve by really thinking about it. This idea of a deep state, I think, is the first thing. Is, everybody's looking for a bogeyman, one person, one group that is sitting around making all these decisions. That's not what's happening. And it's not what's happening in our country right now. Basically, the what you want to call the deep state is really a whole group of different power centers, all of them with divergent views. They work together only when it's in their economic benefit to work together, and they split apart when they're not. And it's really mainly in the bureaucracy of our nations. It's in the departments' bureaucracies that these problems arise, because they've basically been taken over by the economic interests of the corporations, international corporations, and that are outside of it. That the Congress, because it is not doing its duty, it is not doing its constitutional duty, it is not regulating the bureaucracy. These are the problems. We can fix that problem, but we have to understand it's not about Hillary Clinton memos. I mean, that WikiLeaks that you talked about there, it was a perfect example. I mean, when they did a download, okay, I'll tell you, from an intelligence standpoint or from a military standpoint, somebody gets a memo, memo crosses your desk, and you're going to look at it. You immediately are always skeptical of the source, but then you start looking for other things, and you start looking for a trail, and you start looking for additional information. You start looking in different directions, and this is what defeated Hillary Clinton, not the Russians, not not the rise. I mean, the fact of the matter is the people that voted for President Obama twice were they did not come out for Hillary Clinton, and that's what beat her. But then the fake news, because you have to spin the stuff, you have to get this stuff out of the way, because now with these investigations, as an example, you hear people up in the Congress now are saying, well, the investigations are getting in the way of the Republican agenda. Well, that's not true either. That's more fake news. We can go right down the list, but those kind of issues you can only look at something and not say, well, that's fake news or not fake news. You have to try to fix that, put that into some type of analysis of the information that you have. And that is what I call, and how we're going to evolve, gets back to critical thinking. You have to critically think about what is coming to you. And this is why I emphasize this message in all the books, and that it is the individual's ability to be able to see clearly through the things and see through the political process that we are dealing with right now in this country.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. And you mentioned the corporations. I know this is attributed as a spurious quote from Thomas Jefferson, but I'm sure he said this in versions of it. He said, I believe the banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. He says that if we allow the private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations, which you mentioned, that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children wake up homeless in the continent their fathers conquered. The point of that is this. The dumbed down people who don't understand history are condemned to repeat it. And that's exactly what these people in control want. I think that the only way that we can stand up and use critical thinking to oppose this deep state apparatus that wants to destroy the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and introduce some sort of Orwellian surveillance state and some totalitarian dictatorship is to understand and have a sound worldview. And if you don't understand history, if you don't understand what a central bank is, if you don't understand what the central bank's bank is, the Bank for International Settlements, and below them the IMF and the World Bank, if you don't understand that, you don't have that worldview, you're doomed. You don't have any idea who the puppet masters are, do you?
Well, no, you don't, and you don't need to know the names. And I think some of the things that you're getting on there, you're putting on the real issues. I saw recently Ms. Zhang you had on. You've had Ms. Fitz on, and these people are explaining these things in a way that people can understand. And it may sound boring to people, but they're going to have to understand this. One of the things, I had basically 5 messages that I was trying to get to the people, and the first one was to the millennials. That they have to wake up to that, and they're and then it's not about wanting more, it's about what you want more for. And then the critical thinking is your only answer. And that is, if something doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. But you have to decide that. I can only, anybody else, we can only show the doors, show you the door. They have to walk in. And if they don't want to do that, then they really have no right to complain about what's happening and what's going on. But the whole thing is how we are going to evolve. It first starts with the individual to be able to see and think clearly.
Yeah.
And that's why I've stressed that it is the individual that has to evolve first so that he can change the world around him.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the biggest challenge, though, to get through to our friends, neighbors, and colleagues, because, you mentioned that Lynette Zhang interview I did. I'm grateful that that's been watched by more than, I think, 130,000 people at this point. But the problem is that so many people still get their news from Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, God forbid, sure, MSNBC. Do you think, and this is my opinion, I think that CNN has become, or has been for a long time, a weaponized arm of the State Department or the deep state. I think a lot of these mainstream media apparatus are that. It's weaponized media. its purpose is to keep people from obtaining that worldview that I just described that I think is so important. They don't want people to have that accurate worldview.
I understand what you're saying, and having worked in that world for many years, I think the first thing to think about, and it's really important to understand, is that we have right now people at the CIA, at the FBI, at the NSA, that are policy and analysts, intelligence analysts. They probably have the answer to just about every issue that we have internationally. Okay, we have subject matter experts at the State Department and at the Department of Treasury who have studied these people, these regions. These are smart, dedicated, loyal Americans, and your audience needs to understand that. The problem is there's not those people that are in there. They never get a voice. They are locked away and in there. The problem is the politics of power and wealth that is running this country. CNN, okay, as an example, and really you could take. I won't just point a finger at them. I could pretty much say to any of the established media. Okay, if you really want to get down to it, I know a lot of those people. I've dealt with a lot of those people. They're not smart enough to be a weapon for them. What they are is only interested in tabloid journalism to sell commercial time. That's it. It's entertainment. What has happened? What has happened to the journalism is corporations took over these news shows, and news took a back seat to entertainment, ratings, getting these people in. They will push that because it's much easier. It's a lot more fun to talk about, like the 2000 election. What was everybody focused on? The Florida Secretary of State, her hair and makeup, instead of the constitutional issues with somebody who was not counting votes. You want to go to 2016 elections. I mean, there's a perfect example. Donald Trump was elected more with the help of not the Russians, was helped more from the help of the DNC, because the DNC made a political calculation that that Hillary Clinton could beat Donald Trump, where they were wrong, and quite frankly, I was wrong too, because I didn't, she couldn't even beat him. And so CNN, all these people that are pushing these things. I mean, Donna Brazile is CNN contributor, goes into hands the questions to Hillary Clinton before the debate.
Yeah, she couldn't beat Bernie Sanders either. So they just stole it, which is why there's this DNC lawsuit.
They had to physically sabotage that. I don't agree with most of what Senator Sanders says, but by the same token, I appreciated the fact that he was the only one that was really talking about serious issues that needed to be addressed by this country.
Yeah, but you'll notice that he fell. You'll notice he fell into line though, right quick, when they stole it, and I think he knew damn well that they stole it, and he fell right into line and endorsed her.
Oh yeah.
Which is, it's really a sad state of affairs when we cannot, these people are unwilling to stand up. And, you can continue, but I do want to circle back to the thing you mentioned earlier in the interview, that you were around, I think, working at the Pentagon or wherever when the Clintons rose to power. And I want to talk about that because this isn't just a left thing. This deep state includes the right. And, it includes people like Dick Cheney and Bush Sr., who used to head up the CIA, and going back to Prescott Bush, his father, who rubbed elbows with all these big, oligarchs back in the 30s and actually tried to attempt a deep state coup of the government back then. And General Smedley Butler blew the whistle on that and spent the rest of his life, talking about the fact that war is a racket. So we should talk about the fact that this is not the property, this deep state is not the property of just the corrupt left and the DNC. This is the right and the left working together in opposition to the people. Well,
I learned very quickly in the political world and at the highest levels. I've been fortunate in my career and fortunate in my life that I've worked at the highest levels of government. I've worked at the highest levels of the financial industry, and so I've seen some things. Well, the first thing you learn the first thing you learn is that money has no political affiliation. Okay, and when it comes down to that, it's going to be the same thing. The people that Trump brought in, unfortunately, and President Trump has been surrounded with people that that really, especially on the transition team, especially in the national security places, there were some real problems there. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about General Mattis, and I'm not talking about General Kelly. Those are two outstanding Americans, and I trust their judgment. I only hope that they can stay in the positions that they are with a clear head and be the people that they really are. But that's a real problem in the way the government's run by now. But there's a whole bunch of series of other people around that, you want to talk about the people that President Trump has put into certain places within the departments of the government. I mean, these were Republicans that, quite frankly, some of the people that thought leaving Colonel Higgins to be tortured to death was a politically correct answer. Who attempted in 1990 to create a Cold War containment strategy with troops in foxholes in Saudi Arabia. They thought they could implement Titus Vespasian's strategy in the Middle East in 2003, when even the Israelis learned that lesson in Lebanon in the 80s. I mean, if the Israelis couldn't do it, I can guarantee you the United States wasn't going to do it. These are the guys who threw out General Zinni's op plan 1003 for the Iraq, and then falsified intel and redacted CENTCOM evaluations for political purposes. They forced General Franks into a rolling start in 2003 with 1/3 the assets needed, and they thought, and then they came up with a political strategy that said that you can not only occupy and take the country, but you can pacify it, and yet you only had one troop for every 5 square miles. Okay, they refused to cut off a defeated enemy at Bora Bora, and that's when we had a Ranger battalion and a Marine fast team 16 hours away. What were they interested in doing? Was it effective combat operations? Were they looking to change something or win a war? No. There's another idea here. There's another thing going down, and
yeah, I agree.
This is, what was Benghazi really about? What Benghazi was really about, and nobody dares say it. The Republicans don't say it, just like the Democrats don't say it. What Benghazi was really about was everybody was focused on the oil contracts that were now popping up in Libya, because with the dictator gone and that regime, everybody was focused on that. Nobody was paying attention to our guys that were there on the scene, and a lot of our intelligence analysts and a lot of our forces that were in there were saying, "Hey, we've got a real problem here, and we need some security." And nobody cared about that, because they were too busy, as we found out from the WikiLeaks. Well, that people were selling access to the Secretary of State with money to a foundation.
Right.
So these are the problems. And they want to talk about it. Historically, basically, what we had is you went from operation to the operation end of whatever, whether it was working in a bank or being a Marine, to more of a policy and more of a policy position. Okay, but now, unfortunately, we have political people coming in and trying to not only run operations, but actually try to form policy.
Right.
But they look at everything from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, what's good for them.
Well, what's good for their puppet masters? What's good for the people that help them get
exactly.
elected? Like Hillary Clinton, one of her biggest benefactors was Lady Rothschild, who held multiple $100,000 per head fundraisers for her good buddy Hillary Clinton. So again, and you'll recall that, of course, it came out in the WikiLeaks papers and the leaks that Hillary has a public position and a private position, which I think she shared with her banker buddies over at Goldman Sachs, which means she's duplicitous. And again, CNN and the mainstream media, They just want to ignore that. They just want people to think everything's okay, laissez-faire, everything's just fine, go back to sleep. The only boogeyman in Washington, D.C. is Donald Trump. You know, you brought up Afghanistan too, and I just want to mention this. Before the United States went into Afghanistan, the plans for which were on the president's desk prior to 9/11, rolled out immediately after 9/11. Poppy production was at an all-time low under the Taliban. It's now under an all-time high, and heroin is flooding the streets of the United States, both in the inner cities and the suburbs. What's going on in Afghanistan continues to be an absolute debacle. I believe it's on purpose because they want to occupy that nation forever to control the poppy production. You'll recall that the families of SEAL Team 6, of the SEAL Team 6 crash, believe that that incident was an inside job as well. Because, of course, we're told the SEAL Team 6 team went in and got bin Laden, right? They captured bin Laden, took him, I guess, dead or alive. They killed him, and then they disposed of his body over the side of an aircraft carrier with no proof that they'd ever captured him. And then the families of Extortion 17 have to lose all their SEAL Team 6 family members in a helicopter mission in Afghanistan that makes absolutely no sense, right? It's just one lie after another, after another, after another, happily peddled by this mainstream media. And the only people standing in opposition to these lies are people like you and those of us in the truth media.
And everything, you know, I mean, here again, you can start breaking that down, and we can go so deep into that rabbit hole, and all of these problems to the nth degree. The issue here, Sean, is that you know, keep pushing the message out there, because we can do this. Because when you really break it down, the level of control these people have is an illusion. It is an illusion that they are allowed to keep only if the American public says, no, we see through that, we're not interested, and we want something else. And really, right now, we have an opportunity, and it really gets back. People need to understand the system, the way the system runs now, the executive branch of our government, the president himself, he's more of a barometer of the American opinion. They analyze the mood of the people, but the executive branch has no legislative authority, and therefore they really can't do much. The forces that are causing the discontent can't be handled from the Oval Office. And that is the way the founders designed it, because the founders were basically afraid of the most powerful branch of all, and that is the legislative branch. The issue that we have today is the legislative branch is not doing its constitutional duty. It is not regulating a bureaucracy that has grown to unimaginable proportions. And that is where your deep state is. It's not in the individuals within there, as I've talked about. You know, because we've got some great people in the government, and we've got people, knowledgeable people. I met scientists at NASA. Just these people are so out there. I mean, they're real rocket science, and they could help and do so much for us. But the legislative branch, as long as they're not going to be doing their constitutional duty and not regulating that bureaucracy, we're going to continue to have these problems. And it doesn't matter. Donald Trump, George Bush, you could have Hillary Clinton. It's not going to matter. And that is what the American people need to understand. Okay? They're adamantly opposed to having anything come in the way of their power centers, and that's whether the right people are voted in or not. And we need to understand the lesson of Rome, and basically that is there again. One of the things that I keep stressing these ancient histories in the books themselves. But Rome conquered Carthage. They became masters of basically the Mediterranean Sea. It was an accidental empire. And then what did they do? They built a bureaucracy and military power on exploiting that empire. And you look at our country at the end of World War II, there we are. And that's what it is. And that's what I meant when I say, of course, I wrote the first book, 70 years. It took 70 years for the Roman Republic to die and the empire to grow out of that. Well, We're 70 years down the road from 1945, and there's what we have to start thinking about. The issue is simple, and this is what needs to come out. The issue's simple, but here's what we need to get to the American people: is that there's three things that need to have happen, and we can do this if we can change the Congress in 2018. The first is we need comprehensive campaign finance reform. We need a reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall, and we need a repeal of the Patriot Act. Those three things. And when the people start coming to you and start saying, give me your vote, then the American people need to say, I want these three things. I want campaign finance reform, I want a reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, and I want a repeal of the Patriot Act. And when they say, and of course, which they'll do, promise you anything, right? They'll say, how? They'll say, great idea. And you say, okay, show us the plan that you're going to do that. You got 2 weeks. And I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, I don't care, whatever. If you don't have a plan to do those three things, you are not going to get my vote. And that is, if we could get just those three things done, we would solve about 70% of the problem in this country.
Yeah. Well,
and if we were able to do more than that, the other 30%, there again, we could go on for hours about each one of those and how to do it. But that's what I talk about in the book. I give examples of how we can do this because I believe in the American people. I believe in the Constitution, and I believe we're smarter than this.
No, I do too. I believe it too. But I just want to read a couple of quotes because I 100% see. I want to drink the Kool-Aid and believe we can take this thing back. The problem is that, you know, we haven't seen Trump repeal the Patriot Act. We haven't seen him re-implement Glass-Steagall. You know, there's many things he could be doing that he hasn't done, and certainly he's a much better choice than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton would have probably caused me to move out of this country. But in the last 5 minutes we have left here, and I want to give you an opportunity to plug the books and tell people how to get them, I just want to read this that I'm sure you're well aware of, and this is why nothing ever changes. These people are afraid. The people in our government are afraid of those who control the government, the puppet masters. And it was Woodrow Wilson who said, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture, they are afraid of somebody. They are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, and so pervasive that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." And it was Edward Bernays who told us in his book, Propaganda, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of." And perhaps that's why this stinking rotten Congress just signed or approved this new war bill back on July 27th at 6:02 p.m., a bill to provide congressional review and to counter aggression by the governments of Iran, the Russian Federation, and North Korea, and for other purposes. They're calling it the war bill. See, these people are afraid to stand up and do the right thing. Russia doesn't need to be our enemy. It's the DNC and the mainstream media that wants to continue to parrot Russia as our enemy. And why do these people fall in line? Because I think they're deathly afraid of the actual puppet masters. Your thoughts?
I understand what you're saying. And of course, as some people, as President Nixon and President Kennedy found out, there's probably a reason to be afraid of them. But by the same token, they don't have to do things like that anymore because they've paid the Congress off. All we need to do is to get people that will not accept the bribes to actually move forward. And that is why I'm saying the first thing, and I talk a lot about it in the book too, about how to go about a real comprehensive campaign finance reform. Because these people, here again, I know quite a few senators, or I did, and not as many as I was when I was on the Hill, but, you know, and I know these people. I've worked with and dealt with and briefed many congressmen and congresswomen, and I'll tell you, this is not a problem that the whole thing is rotten and we might as well throw it out. This is a problem of we have to change this system, and regardless of how regardless of your politics, we all need to do this. The war bill is, there again, that's a perfect, I can tell you right now, Sean, what that is about. That's about funding, because they have yet to be able to get a budget out. They're looking for another $50 billion to put into the Pentagon. And for what? And, we've got we're $175 billion over budget on the F-35. We still don't have the thing working. It's an airplane that actually flies beyond the capabilities of the people that are flying it. And for what? So that it can drop bombs on mud huts? This kind of stuff, this is the kind of thing. It's all about the budget. It's all about the money.
Right. No, I agree with you. Well, that's precisely why there's 6.2 or 8.2 trillion or more at this point. We'd have to ask Catherine Austin Fitts what the current tally is, but trillions missing from the Pentagon, right? And no, you're right. It's so much waste, and it's so much.
There's a lot to that.
So much theft.
There's a lot more to that. I can only say in that regard. We heard it in 1996 in Independence Day. That was the only time I've ever heard it said in open source. But I forget Goldblum's father in the movie. Said, "Well,
you don't actually think they spend $20,000 on a hammer, $30,000 on a toilet seat, do you?"
Oh, right. You know what one of my favorite lines is from a movie? There's the Jodie Foster movie Contact. It's when the billionaire industrialist tells, I think it's Jodie Foster, when this big time machine thing that they had built had been destroyed. He says, the first rule of government.
First rule in government spending. Why build one when you can have two at twice the price?
There you go.
He reveals to her as part of the deep state government that they had a secret one that they had built. So they had two of them.
And that's what it's about. And that's what I'm saying. This is the illusion. And we need to wake up. I mean, I'd love to. We could keep going on again, but we've really got to get that message out. And basically what I wanted to do with the book is just try to get that message out to people, because we are witnessing the collapse of our Republican form of government.
Yeah.
And there's only two places it can go from here. And it goes from monarchy or it goes to despotism.
That's right.
And you go back to the golden age of Greece, turned into the demigods and the tyrants. The Republic of Rome turned into Imperial Rome. Tsarist Russia turned into Stalin's despotism. No civilization has ever survived what we're dealing with right now by trying to go just the same. And that's the issue today. We have the knowledge. We have the history. The American people are the hardest working, most productive people in history. Our system has created the highest standard of living for the most people in human civilization. Okay, and we have the most revolutionary political testament in history, the Constitution of the United States. Those are our rights. Those are not the government's rights. Those are not the government's authorities. Those are our authorities against the government. And that's why I'm saying, let's get this thing out. Let's keep this message up. Talking, your viewers, and I know by the very fact that they're out there, they're listening to you. These are people that are waking up. They need to wake up one other person. Just that's what you need to keep pushing as you get out there. For my part, I'll tell you what I would like to do. I'm sorry I can't give you a big PAC contribution, but over the next month, anybody, because obviously there'll be people that are listening to this, for the next month, from this era, anybody that buys any books that are sold, you can get them on Amazon. It's in electronic format, or you can get them in hardback. Anybody that gets that I will just send you at the end of the month. I will send you a half of my proceeds to you. You do what you wish. Get the message out. Let's keep pushing. and let's make this thing go.
Yeah.
Because we have to wake up the American people.
Yeah, you mentioned this yesterday. I briefly chatted with you yesterday to schedule this call, and you mentioned that kind gesture of donating half of the proceeds to SGT Report from anybody that buys a book or the whole series of books over the next month, and I really appreciate that. We'll use the money, we'll pay it forward if that happens, William. So thank you so much for that kind gesture. And guys, the latest book, which isn't out yet, is Resurrection: An American Path Forward. When is that one due out, William?
Well, I'm hoping to get that out by the end of the year, as a matter of fact. I'm working on it now. It's like one of the things, especially for guys like me who, I live my life doing something. Writing is a whole different program. So I'm pushing on that. I'm hoping to get it out by the end of this year. And in book 3, basically what I do is I go full circle. I've gone through the life in modern society, addressing what's happening in the world in finance and politics. And then in book 2, I start bringing these people together and saying, here's the process of awakening, if you will. And in book 3, what I'm hoping to do is, where I'm going with it is that basically the old ways are going to get thrown out. And the hero or the protagonist is the main character. He's got his own plan of how this is all going to work out, and he meets up with the young allies, the new generation, and they use the modern day finance, politics, and technology, and with the new generation of leaders to change it, because it's doable. It's doable, my friend.
It is. I believe it's doable. We got to see it as a cup half full. If we look at this whole situation as being completely unrecoverable in a desperate situation, then it makes us stand down, and that's exactly what the controllers want. So, guys, I'll put a link below this video. Yeah. I'll put a link below the video in the more information section, a link to Amazon so you can find the Resurrection books 1 and 2, and, of course, we'll let you know when book 3 comes out. W.H. Wisecarver has been our guest. William, thank you so much for coming on. I think the fact that you worked at the Pentagon and NASA and you're still a constitutionalist and a lover of this country and the Constitution helps us all realize that even though there's lots of questions about those two institutions, the Pentagon and NASA, there are patriots that do work in those places. Maybe next time we have you on, we could talk about, some of your work there at the Pentagon and NASA specifically. NASA, to me, is a real conundrum. I don't believe much of what comes out of NASA, but that's a topic for another day.
That is indeed. And anytime please, I can be reached at bill@whwisecarver.com. I had a website, but unfortunately, somebody hacked into it and messed it up. So, that's good. That's a good sign. Then I know I'm making the right people mad. So right. That's how I look at it. We will continue to press anytime, my friend. And listen, thanks, and look forward to it.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure. So thanks for coming on. I very much appreciate it. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. You know how much we value you. We really appreciate your support. If you want to help us out too, you can check us out on Patreon, but also check out our links to SD Bullion, where you can get such wonderful deals on silver rounds at just, sometimes just a few dimes over spot. A lot of times they'll offer a 10-ounce bar of silver at spot. Click on that link at SGT Report and visit SD Bullion. Get yourself some physical silver to help provide a safe harbor from the economic storm that is most certainly coming here at some point. William, thanks again so much.
With pleasure.
All right. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate it. Have a wonderful week ahead. God bless.
Just in the last 2 days, we announced that we will remove advertising from anything we identify as fake news.